All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about bacteria infections of the skin. And some bacteria infections can cause superficial infections, like impetigo, as shown here with the honey-colored crust. Um, and others are going to be a bit more serious, such as the flesh-eating bacteria. So with respect to the skin has many defenses and barriers against pathogens. You, of course, are going to produce sweat, and that is going to be salty, and pathogens do not like salt. There's also going to be temperature. Your skin can get cool, can get warm. It's going to be colonized by normal flora, and this is very important protection because the normal flora bacteria love sweat, and so they tend to colonize your skin because of that. Staphylococcus aureus, for example, is salt-loving bacteria, and staph other species as well. Now, of course, the skin is also exposed to the oxygen, so any pathogen that cannot survive in an oxygen environment cannot grow on your skin. It also has glands, sebaceous glands, that are going to be important for protecting your skin, and it's typically going to be an acidic environment, so similar to what you would get in your stomach, for example. Now, there are some organisms that cause infections, common infections of the skin. We have, of course, our staphylococcus and our streps, so our normal flora, staph and streps, that can cause infections. We also have for acne, Propionibacterium acnes, and then impetigo, which I just showed you a picture of, and we'll see again, is by strep or staph species. Now, this is a different way to present it, where you're showing the actual bacterium and then what diseases they potentially can cause. So if you look at group A strep, with infections of the skin, this can cause a lot of different presentations, as well as staph can cause a lot of different presentations. Pseudomonas aeruginosa is also going to be able to cause some skin infections, and it is associated with hot tub infections, as we'll discuss. And then we have our soft tissue infections, and these are going to be a bit more serious because they're entering actually into your body. And so this can be necrotizing fasciitis. We also have some of our coliforms, our gram-negatives, and these can cause gangrene and necrotizing fasciitis. We have some, our famous Clostridium perfringens, and that can cause gas gangrene. And Clostridium perfringens is a strict anaerobe, so it would never colonize your skin. Now, fasciitis is going to be infection of the fascia, and this is going to be basically the tissue surrounding your musculature, so all these little membranes. And so there are some non-infectious fasciitis, so not every fasciitis is going to be infectious, of course, most are not. The one we're going to be interested in is the necrotizing fasciitis. Now, necrotizing fasciitis is going to be caused by our strep pyogenes, our group A strep, and is going to begin as just a simple red swollen area, but it's going to spread rather quickly. This is going to be associated with a fever, and it has to be treated very quickly. This is what we call a flesh-eating bacteria. And you can see here that it has a very invasive infection. Now, some other infections that our strep A can cause is our aerosyphilis, and this is going to cause edema, which is this red, painful, swelling nodules, and the edema means basically that your white blood cells are moving into the tissue that is infected. This is going to also be potentially caused by our staph species as well, but it's most commonly caused by strep A, which is our pyogenes. Now, this is going to be a little bit more superficial than a cellulitis because it's in the upper layers of the skin. You're going to have a more raised, demarcated, because again, you're swelling the upper layers. Typically, you'll have a swollen face, which is including both cheeks as well as the nose, but it can occur anywhere. Some complications would be septicemia, gaining access to blood, and necrosis of the skin, the dying of the areas inflamed. Folliculitis is going to be typically begin on infection of some sort of hair or sweat gland, those sebaceous glands. Staph aureus is going to cause minor infections, so typically on staph you will have a boil, and the boil will be full of staph and pus. Now the boil, if it's present, your antibiotics cannot gain access to the boil, so you have to actually drain the abscess to get the bacteria and to treat it. This picture is showing Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which causes larger areas of folliculitis, and this is also going to be associated with fever. This is known as hot tub folliculitis. Now, acne, I'm not going to spend too much time on acne. There are many causes of acne. The one that is infectious is inflammation acne. This is going to be caused by propionium bacterium acnes. But most acnes are not going to be infectious in nature. Now, one that we'll talk about a little bit is gas gangrene. This is caused by Clostridium perfringens. Clostridium species are commonly found in the soil, Clostridium tetani, Clostridium perfringens, and these are going to be gram-positive anaerobic, strict anaerobes, so they do not grow in the air, so they'd be in the soil. In the soil, they're going to form spores, and so the spores are going to be transmitted to people. And once the spores get access to a cut or to some sort of damage to the skin, that's where they can start to cause problems, because they have the ability to sort of wall themselves off, and then they can create their own anaerobic environment. So Clostridium perfringens is associated with tissue necrosis. It likes to wall itself off, stop the blood supply, so it's going to break down your endothelial cells that line the blood vessels, and it's going to prevent the blood supply with that rich oxygen coming in. It's going to be associated with gas, and typically you have to have a relatively deep wound, so not just a scratch on the surface to get Clostridium. And again, it's because it cannot grow in an oxygen environment. Now, gas gangrene onset is about 12 to 48 hours after you have your exposure and injury. It's going to have cryptant gas, cryptant tissue, which has a presence of hydrogen gas. It's going to be very foul smelling. It's going to have a snap and crackle, a popping sound when you move your fingers, for example. And this is definitely lethal if not treated. Now, the treatment is going to be penicillin. Clostridium is very susceptible to penicillin still, at least for your gangrene. And they're also going to have hyperbaric chambers. These are oxygen chambers, and these will help to kill the bacteria as well, putting a lot of oxygen into the environment where the bacterium are. And then finally, just really quickly about cutaneous anthrax. We often hear about anthrax as an inhalation anthrax, which is very lethal. But Bacillus anthracis is also hanging out in the soil, and this guy can cause cutaneous infections of the skin. And so cutaneous anthrax is a more common version of anthrax than inhalation anthrax. The spores will enter the wound, and then they will form lesions. The lesions will look like an insect bite. So you start with a papule, which 7 to 10 days it gets vascularized, and then it becomes ulcerative, and it has this sort of appearance. And then, of course, our Bacillus anthracis forms these little chains, these little strands, which is very unique for this bacterium.